guys, Prowl 1701 here. Today we're going to be talking about Doctor Who and the Cave Monsters, which I believe was the original title and the omnibus title of Doctor Who and the Silurians. Now, I have watched the Season 7 omnibus of Doctor Who and the Silurians, which I enjoyed. I've always liked Doctor Who and the Silurians. I don't think it's S-tier Doctor Who, but it is good Doctor Who. And, I mean, Season 7's a strong season anyway. I liked the omnibus, with the exception of every now and then when a scene is cutting to another scene, it's a bit jarring, because it'll be like the doctor talking to someone, and it cuts directly to the doctor doing something else. Like the doctor talking to this person in this outfit, to the doctor walking into a cave in his miner outfit. And it's really weird, because immediately I think something got cut there, didn't it? That does it? Maybe I'm wrong. But it just feels like something's cut out when the doctor is like, he's walking around in the mine, and then, oh, hey, look, he's talking to, someone else in a totally different outfit, and it's just straight from one to the other. It's really jarring. And that does happen a few times, not a lot of times, 3, 4, 5, something like that times, where it just feels a bit jarring when it happens. And I'm sitting there immediately going, that's a cut. Something got cut there, didn't it? Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like something got cut there. Now, Silurians has always seemed a little too long to me. Not necessarily overly long. I think 6 parts, like 6 parts. At 7 parts, it runs just a tad long. With some characters I often find uninteresting, like the one guy who's actually trying to work with the Silurians that gets killed. Never cared for him. Or the woman that was kind of assisted him. Never cared for her. Always kind of felt bad that, I lost my train of thought. I like, though, that it has Peter Miles in it. I love Peter Miles. You guys know that. I don't know why either, because I really just know him mostly from Doctor Who. But, sometimes you just have those actors that for some reason you just really like. I'm like that with Burgess Meredith, too, because I'm not a huge fan of the Rocky movies. And while I liked Batman 66 as a kid, I don't really watch it as an adult. Of course, he played the Penguin in that. But it's more his Twilight Zone episodes, because he is in both of my 2 favorite Twilight Zone episodes. My favorite, The Obsolete Man, and my second favorite, which is Time Enough at Last. Plus, he's in 2 other ones as well. He's also in a semi-decent episode of the Night Gallery. Not a great episode, but a decent episode. But for some reason, I just have this strong affinity for Burgess Meredith. I get really excited when I see him in something. And I'm kind of like that with Peter Miles, too. And I'm getting where I'm like that with Paul Darrow as well, which this also has. We'll get to that. But for some reason, Peter Miles, I'm like that. I get really excited when I see Peter Miles in something. And he's just always so good. It's just the way he plays his characters. Plus, he has a cool voice. I like Peter Miles' voice. But again, like Paul Darrow, who has a cool voice. I just like that when Peter Miles showed up. Just like in the Paradise of Death audio from the 90s. As soon as I found out Peter Miles was in that, I'm like, ooh, I get more Peter Miles Doctor Who. I got super excited. So I'm already happy I got Peter Miles. And then this is the first time I've ever watched this knowing Paul Darrow's in it. Because the character he plays, it's very easy to overlook the fact that Paul Darrow is in this, unless you're just really familiar with Paul Darrow. So I had never tracked that. Matter of fact, I just now on this watch figured out who he is. Well, that and when I watched the Behind the Sofa for it. Because, I kept hearing Paul Darrow was in Doctor Who and the Silurians. And I was like, where? Because I couldn't figure out who he was. Because, sometimes when you hear, oh, so-and-so was in that, you might stop and go, holy crap, he was. But, the first time I saw Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, I didn't realize David Tennant was in it, because it's right when David Tennant was going to the doctor. But as soon as somebody mentioned him, like, he is? Oh, yeah, he's that guy. Whereas when I found out Paul Darrow was in Silurians, I was like, where? And it wasn't until I was watching, which I watched the Behind the Sofa first, and they pointed it out. I'm like, oh, okay. And then when I was watching the Omnibus, I'm like, okay, he's playing this kind of side character, like a captain in unit, because Benton really hadn't been established as a permanent character yet. We didn't really get that to the next story. So he's just kind of filling in as kind of a Benton-like character, for this story. And I hate that he gets killed at the end. I hate that, because it's so senseless and doesn't need to be there. And he doesn't really get a lot to do. I mean, he gets stuff to do. It's like, but he's unnoticeable. I don't know what it is. It's not Paul Darrow's performance. Maybe it's the fact he's in that helmet so much of the story, so you don't get as good a look at him. And God, he looks so young. But you just don't notice him. He's kind of he just feels like an extra with a few lines, really, that you don't stop and go, that's Paul Darrow. I think even if I hadn't known that was Paul Darrow, even after having watched so much of Blake 7, I don't think I would have clocked it. Like, now I can understand not realizing the first. I think I've watched Silurians 2 or 3 times because I own the DVD box set, the Beneath the Waves box set, which has Silurians, Sea Devils, and Warriors Deep in it. And, I never clicked that it was Paul Darrow. But most of the time when I watched those, I hadn't started watching Blake 7 yet. So I didn't really know who Paul Darrow was other than Time Lash. But now that I've seen Time Lash a couple times, I've watched most of Series 1 of Blake 7, I'm very familiar with Paul Darrow now. And I also know he was in, Medieval, the game. And I still don't think that I would have clocked that was Paul Darrow if I hadn't been informed ahead of time that was Paul Darrow. Because this character, even though he's getting stuff to do and he's getting some lines of dialogue, he still feels like part of the background. And I just kind of wish, because it is Paul Darrow, that there'd been a little more substance there. And he's doing what he can with it, but it never feels like he really gets as much attention as say, Benton. Of course, maybe it's just because it's Benton. I always know it's Benton, so I'm always paying attention to him because it's Benton. But it's just a little disappointing because he's, even in the Omnibus, Paul Darrow gets some screen time. He always feels like just that kind of background character you never notice, even though he's getting lines of dialogue. And then he just kind of gets killed at the end, and I'm like, oh. The story, the Omnibus feels fine. Like, as someone who's always thought Silurians was too long anyway, I'm fine with that. I was fine with the length, other than, again, it feeling a little rough sometimes when scenes would cut, especially going from a scene with a doctor to a scene with a doctor, where it obviously feels wonky. It's kind of like, I was going to compare it to Legends of the Sea Devils, but the editing never gets as bad as Legends of the Sea Devils. I mean, kind of like when you're watching, Omnibus of any story, or cut downs, or the Daleks in color. You can always feel sometimes where something gets edited out. It's kind of like that, but not as much of a degree as some of those other stories. It's not egregious. Legends of the Sea Devils, just in general, feels like a cut-down version of a story, more so than any cut-down version of a story I have ever seen. There is not The War Games in color is a better cut-down of the War Games than Legends of the Sea Devils is as a story. Legends of the Sea Devils feels like a much worse cut-down of an episode that we never got, that we should have got. Because the Legends of the Sea Devils feels like such a just trimmed down. The editing, I've never seen a Doctor Who story that was so poorly edited. And that includes cut down versions. I feel like there's a version of Legends of the Sea Devils that if they took the time and actually took all of the film, there's a proper episode in there somewhere. But this flows fine, other than those few jarring things. I enjoyed it. Would it be the version I would go to? Possibly. As someone who typically enjoys omnibuses for what they are, I tend to prefer the standard versions of episodes. But I could see this being my default version, just because I find Silurians runs a little long in the tooth, and a lot of the guest characters don't grip me, especially the one guy and his female assistant that are trying to work behind everybody's backs. Also, the guy who gets taken prisoner and originally infected by the virus, I don't care much for him. I love having Jeffrey Palmer. I believe that's his name, Jeffrey Palmer. Love that I get more of Jeffrey Palmer. I always like when he shows up in Doctor Who. I know he's also in The Mutants and Voyage of the Damned. He's always amazing. Again, he's another one of those actors. I know him from something else. I don't know why, but I know his face. He's another one of those I just, for some reason, I like. I don't know why, but I just inherently like him. Maybe he's in something I saw as a kid, so I have some kind of attachment to him that I just don't realize. I don't know. But I like that. I like all of the different themes. This is a very adult story. This has got to be a Malcolm Holt story. I've watched the Malcolm Holt documentary, and I believe it's on one of the Silurian discs, so it's got to be a Malcolm Holt, because it has so many different adult themes running through it. Malcolm's such a great writer. Dealing with everything with the plague, which really hits harder post-COVID. And then also the makeup for the plague is really good. The little marks and everything, that does a really good job of being effective, even more so than some of the makeup used in the modern series, like the old woman makeup for Clara in Last Christmas that looks garbage. The makeup in that they use for that looks really good. Plus, got to give credit for Peter Miles when he's about to die at the end. The makeup combined with the way he's just the way he's playing the character so unhinged. Peter Miles is great. And credit to Jeffrey Palmer when he does his death scene. And credit to the director and cameraman there when he's like on the little fin that looks like jail bars, honestly. And he's going where he just flops down. Wonderful shot. Wonderful shot. There's some great camera work going on in here. The cave sets look pretty nice. I mean, they're obviously cave sets, but they look pretty nice sets. I feel like the factory sets look really good. The walls look very boring. Season 7 has some very boring walls. That's an odd complaint, but the walls look very boring in Season 7. They have this very neutral, uninteresting color to them in a lot of the, like, military bases and factories and stuff. The walls are my least favorite part of the whole season. They always look bad. Sometimes because of the color not being the masters, maybe. Sometimes the walls look a weird color. Really weird. But they're very uninteresting. It's an odd complaint, I know. The Silurian outfits don't wow me, but they're still 1,000 times better than how the Silurians look in Modern Who. I hate the Modern Who Silurian design because they try to make them Silurians, but human. We need Silurians that look human. Basically, what happened was they wanted to have the attractive Silurian in that first episode. Well, we've got to redesign them because we've got to make a female Silurian that you want to sleep with. You're not supposed to want to, but you want to sleep with. And let's be honest, that's what they were doing. So they want you to have the Silurian, this lizard person that you still want to do. And it's very annoying. I have no respect for the Silurians in the modern series. The classic Silurian design we see here, which I still think is the best the Silurians ever look, still isn't blowing me away. It's obviously someone in a suit, but I like the fact they have claws. They have the kind of more clawed, toed, dinosaur feet. They have the third eye. They have the different sight. They have the way they talk that's different. I like this because modern Silurians, they try to make them too human. Especially those human eyes, ruin it for me. I can't take the Silurians in the Modern Who seriously when they have those way too human eyes. And the way they talk, it loses me. Now, I'm willing to accept the fact that they're just different branches of the Silurians, possibly, because the Sea Devils are like that. The Sea Devils are like a different branch of the Silurians. They're the water versions of the Silurians. So I could firmly believe that there's sub-branches of the Silurians that look different. I can headcanon that just fine. Like, I could believe the modern Whoans could be Nor Silurians, and the classic Whoans could be Car Silurians. If they had like little sub-names or something, just pulling them, out of thin air. I could believe that. Where there's different versions of the Silurians. And you can play with that design. One thing I'll at least give Legends of the Sea Devils that I like is that they kept the classic Sea Devil design. My hat's off. That's the one thing I will admit Legends of the Sea Devils got right. they did the Sea Devils justice in that. The way they look, with using their classic design and just slightly modernizing it to where they could have a little more facial movement. But chef's kiss to that. The one thing I will compliment about that episode, and I hope they do that in the spinoff as well, but they probably won't, because the people who do the modern series and good ideas are just not something that go hand in hand far too often these days. But I enjoyed the pacing. And the restoration looked good. I don't think I've really talked about the restoration. How can I be talking about this for so long without talking about the restoration? The restoration looks good. Silurians looks better than it's ever looked on home media, in my opinion. This, of course, is always one of the stories that looked rough even on DVD, with skin tones looking uneven, backgrounds looking uneven, especially those walls. It takes a much cooler palette. Like, it has cooler colors than the DVD release. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I would have preferred warmer colors. I think that works for me better. But it still definitely looks better. The one guy who's working with the Silurians that gets killed, he always looked weird for me. The color on him never looked right. And it looks much better. Although, again, watching the Omnibus version, the color quality varies, because we know the color quality varies from episode to episode of Silurians, where, you know, some is color recovery, some is not, and some it worked better in some episodes than others, so the color quality varies from episode to episode. So when you're watching the Omnibus and it's all jammed together, it is changing a bit as you're watching it. Like, I thought episode 1 actually looked really good, and then there's one part, which I'm assuming is around episode 3 or so, still looked a bit rough. But the colors looked more stable, and far less of a situation where I was cringing because I knew that that these weren't the original masters and that they were doing the best they can. And it's a miracle we have it in color anyway. It looked much more consistent, and I was much more pleased with the results, while still, of course, knowing they don't look as good as stories where you have the original masters, like season 10, for example, or most of season 11. Well, most of season 10, most of season 11, which look more consistently good, or something like Day of the Daleks, where you have all of your masters. Of course, I know they're not that good, but it's still a thing, I think, where if you were a casual viewer and you didn't know about missing episodes and masters and the junking policy, you'd probably just assume, well, this is what 70s Doctor Who looks like because it's 70s Doctor Who. And you wouldn't, you know, you would just be going, okay, it looks like older TV. You wouldn't be going, why is the color doing weird stuff? It is a much more of an improvement. And once you adjust to it, again, the colors being slightly cooler, like they're, you know, instead of having the warm filter, you got the cool filter. You can really enjoy it, and I did find the restoration work to be very good considering the limitations. I found it much more enjoyable, and definitely the best the episodes have ever looked. So I think that about covers everything I want to talk about. I enjoyed the Omnibus. I could see myself watching it again in the future, as again, this is a story that runs a little long in the tooth for me. I'm still a bit disappointed we didn't get an Ambassadors Omnibus. I really feel like we should have gotten one. Like, they gave us an Inferno one we don't need, but not an Ambassadors one, which we could have used. So I want to know what you think of the Omnibus of Silurians. What you think of the color restoration on Silurians. Comment down below and let's talk about it. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button as well. I also have a Patreon if you would like to support me on that. There's a link to that down in the description. I want to give a shout out to some of my top tier patrons, Colin Coney, Sam Venning, and Finn Perkins. I appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. It's very much appreciated, and my YouTube members. I have a P.O. box down there if there's anything you'd like to send me to look at and review. I always love getting fan mail. A link to my Amazon wish list is down there, and my Amazon UK wish list as well. Most importantly, thank you for watching.